Another minute? I guess not. Okay. Okay, we are right now starting the second chapter after our controversial ending to the first chapter regarding the duties and obligation vis-a-vis women and Talmud Torah. The Rambam now shifts gears and discusses the early day school system or the yeshiva cheder system and how it all started. Okay, that's how, and ideally, the way in a perfect world we should be teaching our children. And as we go on, we'll see that this is far from perfect today. Okay, chapter 2 of Hilchas Talmud Torah. Moshivin. Okay, and by the way, the Rambam gets a lot of this from Maseches Bava Basra in the second chapter, around Daf Chaf or so, if you want to look it up. That's where the Rambam gets a lot of these sources. He says, Moshivin melamde tinokus v'chol medina u'medina b'chol plachu plachu b'chol ir v'ir. Right. So first of all, in terms of jurisdiction and districting, so basically you need teachers set up, okay, in every place. Not like you have one in the capital city and then everyone has to, travel 12 hours to get there. Every village basically has to have their own, we'll call it a school. And let's say you have a village or a city that doesn't have a yeshiva. Machrimin es anshe ha'ir. Wow. He doesn't play games, the Rambam. He says you got to put the place in cherem. That is really difficult. The whole village is in cherem. Okay, that's it's quite a stand. Until they put up a school system. And if they still don't, not only do they first start with the anshe ha'ir, the people, then the whole entire city, everyone suffers. Okay, it sounds like it's a little bit more far-reaching than initially. Why? What is so okay, it's certainly a great thing to have education and a system and everything, but what is the big deal? So the answer is she'en ha'olam miskayim ela behevel pm shel tinokos shel beis rabban. Because the Rambam says the reason why the world is existing today, if you could call it existing anymore, but assuming you consider today that we're existing, the only reason why this world today is spinning on its axis is because of the children who study Torah. This is a very, very deep and profound line. Just a thought that came to mind is there's a famous Chaim of Volozhin who says the reason why we have this concept of time zones, and it's not one time around the world, which would be impossible because the sun, sets at different locations, obviously, and every minute the sun is rising and every minute the sun is setting. The reason why we have this is because the Torah has to be learned every second of the day. So if it was 2 a.m., right, there won't be any Torah, well, except for Rabbi Hertzfeld in Baltimore writing a Torah at that time, so maybe he'll spare the world. But aside from him, right, you need different times of each day to make
You
sure people
realize
are up.
Baltimore is an hour away from us.
An hour? Okay, look at that. Either way, just like we need time zones so that we'll have people up all the time, right, learning Torah, that's what the Rambam over here alludes to. The only reason why this earth is spinning is because of the Torah that comes out of the children's mouths. That is a real, if you ever need a quick one-liner, this is it. Rambam, Hilchas Talmud Torah, Perek Beis, Halacha Aleph. Beautiful way to end that halacha. Machnisen es hatinokos lehislamid kiben sheish kiben sheva. So how does it work? How does admissions work? So the Rambam says, well, admissions start at the age of 6 or 7. And he's alluded to this already in the last parak, that 6, 7, not that 6, 7 that people talk about today. Maybe that's where it came from. But the Rambam 6, 7 is the age at which you start cheder. Lefikoach habenu binyan gufo. It's that's like the mean average, the mean or the average, but it does go according to how healthy the kid is, or how well built he is, his physical appearance. But less than 6, unless he's like a real Doogie Howser, right? That's not a good idea to start bringing him into cheder. Let him stay at home with his parents, right? Or as they call today, right, the nursery, right? Like when you're 4. Umaka oso hamalamid lahatil aleim ema. So Rambam's going to say something a bit controversial. The Rambam was into what we call corporal punishment. Absolutely hit the kid. Okay, I'm not going to comment. Um, you got to do what you got to do in order to beat him into shape. The in makos, so makos oyev, makos achsari. You don't want to put him in a headlock, right? You don't want to do like the cops do today to people, right? You can't beat the crap out of him. Just a little bit. With a whip. Okay, the Rambam actually has one other, not one, but at least off the top of my head, the Rambam also allows a husband to beat a wife with a whip to keep her into shape. We'll get to that in Hilchas Ishus, maybe like in 2033. Okay, we have something to look forward to. The Yoshev Umalamdan Kol Hayom. So, what are the hours of the school? So, is it like today where it's 9 to 1, right? We're very, very easy today. The bar is low. Nope, not in the world of the Rambam. The hours of school are all day. Kol Hayom Kulo, as long as there's daylight, and if that weren't enough, Umiktas Min Halayla, as the night approaches. So we're looking at 7 a.m. to possibly 8 p.m., depending on the season. And there are no summers off. This is not like it is today, where we end in June 15th and we start September 1st, right? Labor Day. There's no Labor Day in Egypt 1,000 years ago. That's why that he should be ready to learn at night, so that teach him at night. So when is intercession? How does it work in terms of yeshiva break? Well, it doesn't exist. You have off Erev Shabbos, okay? No school on Fridays, like MTA. Yomim Tovim, Erev Yontif, but not like 3 days before Pesach, so you could pack up your suitcase and travel. We don't do that, right? V'lo chutz ma'ar b'Shabbos of Yom Tovim b'sof hayomim b'Yom Tovim aval b'Shabbos ein korin b'tchila aval shonin barishon. Shabbos, we kept the schools closed on Friday, on Erev Shabbos, and on Yontif, obviously, and on Shabbos itself. The Rambam isn't clear whether the school is open or not. It doesn't sound like it is. But if you teach Ein Korin B'Tchila, you don't teach something new, or as they call it today, new material. We don't start learning on Shabbos. But Shabbos is a day for Aval Shonin Barishon, is for what we call Chazara. Okay, I'm not sure if that means that if you're at home, right, and you're learning, you don't want to start something new, or they would actually have the school open on Shabbos. I would really not like to believe that they had a school open on Shabbos, but who knows? Forget about ski week and going to Vail and going to Moshava in July and August. That doesn't exist. Not only that, you can't even interrupt the children for building the Beis Hamikdash. Wow. That is charif. What do you think about that, Shmuel? Malamed
It
hatinokos
just
shehumin.
means that that Torah is more important than the base of Mikdash.
Yeah, right. But
Well, we
it's
already say that in Menachos. It says that better to study Torah than to bring the Karban Mincha.
right, right. Torah trumps everything, even Trump. Malabed hatinokos shehumeniach hatinokos v'yotze. So let's talk about bad teachers. All right, I'm sure we could all relate to this. We all went to MTA. So what if you have a teacher that just goes out? Maybe he doesn't come every Tuesday, or maybe he just leaves the kids alone and goes in the hall and goes on his phone. Is that a good teacher? We say no. What if he goes and I don't know, he's doing a second job? Or he's just a bad teacher. He never got his degree in teaching. That is under the category of Arur Osam Alechas Hashem Ramiyah. Yirmiyahu gives a curse to any person who performs God's work Ramiyah with trickery. Right? You're kind of like hired to do something and you're not doing the right job, so you're tricking them. So therefore, it's only proper to find a teacher who is a Yiras Hashem and someone who's very, very careful. Right? The Gemara in Bava Basra talks about how careful you have to be, and it has a really, really wild story about David and Yoav, I think, who, right, he taught him, instead of Zecher Amalek, he taught him Zachar Amalek, and there was a really bad ending to that story. So if you want to look that up, that's, I think, on Taf Chaf Aleph or so. We got time for one short one. Misha ein lo isha lo yalamed tinokos. So let's talk about the status of a teacher, the marital status. He has to be married, because if he's a single guy or a bachelor, right, what's going to happen? He's going to have women come for PTA night, and that is going to be too much to handle. He's going to have a Yetzer Hara, and not a good idea. How about a woman? Should a woman teach children? So the whole assumption that we're talking about male teachers. So the male teacher has to be married, but you can't even have a woman teacher whether she's married or whether she's not married. Women should not teach children because fathers will come to pick up the child, right? Even though it's, in this world, it's the mother's job, but on occasion the fathers come, that's a no-no. So how come it's not fair? How come the man is allowed to be married and teach? What about the women? So I guess he doesn't have as much as a Yetzer Hara, right? Maybe the Yetzer Hara is worse by a woman. I don't know. Okay, do we have time for one more, or that's it? All right, we'll do one more. So what is the student to teacher ratio? All right. Today we have something like 20-1, right? That's ideal. So let's see what the Rambam says. The max should be 25-1 ratio. Right now, then they didn't have these TAs and assistants and substitutes, and here it's much a different. It's a totally different story. From 25 to 40, you did have a TA. If there was more than 40 in one class, if there are more than 40, then you have a tag team. And I guess we'll stop there.